Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We're coming to you from these United States of America, here in the middle of the country, good old Iowa, between the confluence of two rivers. On Iowa Catholic Radio, this is The Uncommon Good, and it is so wonderful to be with you. I'm Bo Bonner. You might hear me on another Iowa Catholic Radio show, which is the Catholic Morning Show, of which I'm the host, which means I'm up early with all of you early birds, but enjoying the fact that we get to join you here on the weekend. Bud, what do you do?
Right now, I am the Dean of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Mercy College of Health Sciences in downtown Des Moines, Iowa, at the confluence of two rivers.
I'm liking that we're really pushing the river bit this time.
They meet right at the college. No, one of them flows by the college.
It is true. The corner of the two rivers used to be where Iowa Catholic Radio was broadcast from. I mean, pretty much, right? It was in the Pastoral Center. We are now out west, kind of looking down the hill like we're Batman, just making sure the city's doing well. But we broadcast all sorts of places. For everybody who listens on air as it's happening, all the way up in the Spirit Lake region, the Iowa Great Lakes, which I didn't know existed until we started being produced up there. But all around, we're trying to expand our reach. So anybody who's listening to this live, it's wonderful to have you with us. But of course, you can listen on iowacatholicradio.com, the Iowa Catholic Radio app, and many of our podcast listeners, thank you for listening to the show. But, you know, it was warm a bit, and then it was extremely cold. And now it might be warm a bit depending on, you know, what people are doing, whether this is Saturday or Sunday broadcast. This weather, it's just trying to play tricks on us. That's the point.
Yeah, I don't really mind. I'm a connoisseur of winter, and in part, it's just I get hot very easily. And people say, well, if you're hot, you can always discard clothes. But I find...
Not really. There's a limit.
Yeah.
It's like a math problem.
In my social circles, it's better strategy for me to layer up.
No, I actually like the cold too. It was quite windy. We were having, I think, negative 30 wind chill. That's pretty brisk. But otherwise, no, I've been happy with it being winter. Speaking of brisk, what are we going to talk about today as a pretty brisk document? Maybe more like brisket. It's meaty. It has a lot in it. But we're going to be talking about the Vatican document on artificial intelligence because we are continuing our series talking about technology, theology, and the common good. I hope some people enjoyed last week's episode. This was the connection I was going to make, Bud. Did you hear that it's a very 80s reality thing. KFC is moving its headquarters to Texas.
Oh.
I know. And that really seems like the end of the last, you know, the 80s is truly dead if KFC can't even stay in Kentucky for its headquarters.
You do know and realize Kentucky is in your name. I mean, I feel like that kind of binds you to a place.
I mean,
oikophilia.
Well, actually, but I think they actually changed it to KFC.
Oh, it's
officially.
It's not really an acronym anymore.
Well, I mean, of course it is, but I don't know if it officially is. All this gets to is, I was just trying to point out, one of the segments we did earlier this week on the Catholic Morning Show was about Generation X.
Yeah.
Potential saints.
Oh.
And it's always interesting to think that if they would still be alive today, they would be our age, but they're sort of immortalized in that, you know, age in the past. And it's nice to think of saints, you know, doing stuff that we did when we were growing up. But I wonder if any of those potential saints are as offended as I am that even though I can't eat Kentucky Fried Chicken, there's one of their mystery seasonings that doesn't sit with me well. But it's just wrong, and especially of all places to move, Texas. Very grating.
Wow, you're really bearing your soul here. No, I think folks will love this show. We've been doing the technology series, and like you said, this is the Vatican document. I feel like this is a hot topic. We were talking to a priest friend, and he was sharing that he gave a little spiel about AI and like homily preparations, and within the next day he had like 8 invitations to give talks elsewhere. So folks are clamoring for the AI conversation.
Well, maybe we can get those invitations as well. Just contact at iowacatholicradio.com if you need us to go talk about AI or technology. This is Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr with the Uncommon Good. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. We are keeping on with our technology segment. Segments about technology. We're having shows, a series about technology, theology, and the common good, Catholic social teaching. And so after sort of setting the scene and then, reminiscing a bit to talk about how much technology has changed within our lifetimes, Bud, today we're going to talk about the Vatican's document on artificial intelligence. You can you could go with a fine-tooth comb and really go paragraph to paragraph. I think salient for us and the series that we're doing is to show how much this is a topic that's both on the minds of even the people over the seas in Rome, but also maybe, things, catchphrases, ideas, foundational worries to keep in mind as we keep going forward. I have to say that out of the gate, what I most appreciate is this document points out that artificial intelligence is maybe not even artificial, nor is it intelligence, but why it is that a sort of pithy phrase has almost an all-encompassing anxiety about many technologies in our age, even if they're not all technically artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a friend back in graduate school, and he was saying that, he was kind of pressing this as an interesting thought exercise, but he was describing angels as kind of counterfactuals. And what he meant by that is that we can better understand human beings in the ways that we're different from angels.
Right.
And I really feel like this document, it says a lot that's important about artificial intelligence, but I think it also shines a light really well on what it means to be a human being. I was intrigued by the whole thread in the document that gets into the nature of human intelligence. Mm-hmm. And we kind of can reduce, this can influence how we even teach students. We can kind of reduce students to repositories of information. Now, we both have taught in places where memorization was a term with positive connotations, must be an important skill for you to have. But the document points out that when we think about intelligence, there's actually two modes. One is intellectus. It's kind of this intuitive grasping of the truth. Mm-hmm. And the other is ratio. Ratio is kind of our discursive analysis of what we know. And so, you already kind of gestured at this saying artificial intelligence, it's not truly intelligence in the way, if we talk about intelligence as we understand it as something that human beings practice. And part of it, as the document points out, is the fact that we're embodied creatures. We're body and soul. So our knowing involves all of the self. And we can't really, it's wrong-headed to think about the brain as sort of a powerful computer.
And there's so much to get into that. One of the things, so first of all, it bringing up intellectus and ratio. I know that that's a big tradition, especially within Thomism. But of course, this is very famously the discussion Joseph Pieper opens up with in his very famous book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture and the Philosophical Act. And so I don't know if that's exactly who they had in mind, because of course there's more sources of that thought that they could have appealed to. But I loved the fact that they brought this up precisely to say there's a fullness in human intelligence that encompasses both of those strands, like you said, and they can seem very different. And even when we want to say, oh, well, maybe AI is more ratio and what it's lacking is intellectus, and that's why it's not human, this document wants to point out that maybe it's not even doing ratio, which will be interesting. We can get into that. Certainly it says that that's where it trends towards, but how humans do ratio. But just to explain that point, because it's so elemental going forward, intellectus, where we get the word intellect, intellectual, and I'm going to be throwing in Pieperisms just as much as the document, so forgive me on this one. But this is the sort of capacious nature of the human intellect, that it's an active receptivity. When I teach students about this, I said, imagine a camera with its aperture as wide open as possible. Mm-hmm. So this is where, with not only silence and contemplation, but even a sort of style of attention, that we attend to reality and actively accept it as things that have been given, right? We accept the gift of intellectus itself. Ratio is maybe more, instead of attention, it's focus, right? So if you imagine that lens and it focuses in, right? That lens gets smaller because it really wants to sort of drill in on certain details. So ratio, and you think about that of rationality or ratios, right? This compared to that, this in proportion to this, that starts to be where we break things down. We really chew things, break things into their composite parts. and that whatever else the human intelligence is, and this is not getting into epistemology. We can talk about, like, do those happen simultaneously? Do they pass back and forth? There's big arguments about what that means. But to your point, both of them show different aspects of being embodied, right? Mm-hmm. So even though we can contemplate, spiritual realities, things that aren't material, our beginning, even in intellectus, is sort of an active receptivity of creation through our senses, right? So it is a practice of the senses to allow ourselves to be sort of washed over with creation, right? To really see the imprint of God in creation by accepting it as a gift. Ratio, conversely, right, is sort of drilling down. It can get abstract pretty fast. In fact, that's what I would argue is like the sort of temptation of ratio, maybe where we get into your brain's a computer thing. But even there, right, there's this idea of the way that ratio is really usually done together in community, right? This is where dialectic and sort of argumentation and logic, as much as it can seem like logic tries to be disembodied, it is really embodied in the sort of communal pursuit of making distinctions and things like that. AI technically, very much does not do intellectus. And then I would argue doesn't quite do the fullness of what we mean by ratio, but clearly that's the sort of side, as it were, of the sort of intellectual aspect of humans that fell on, right? Clearly the ratio aspect of human intellect created what we call AI to aid it in what it does, but it's not exactly the same thing either.
So with saying all that, you can actually relieve some fears that have been generated by science fiction films. Right. Because I don't think AI can ever take over the world, as it were, or, politically, because that sort of thing would involve some sort of like will and direction, a kind of like plan. So, I mean, AI could spit out sort of like a plan for taking things over, but it would have to be enacted by human beings. Now, I mean, I think you understand this better than I do. Like, AI is kind of mirroring human thought. It's a really powerful, I'm going to say, machine that sort of like, the document points out that what it does is very functional. And so its power to make computations is impressive, but there's not will, there's not direction. Another thing you could say is like, AI could never worship God. You couldn't design a computer program to offer true worship. And again, that's where it almost presents a kind of counterfactual, like by seeing what it cannot do, we sort of see the uniqueness of who human beings are. And when God created these creatures who were rational beings to worship him, they were embodied. And our worship, kind of prescinding from that, when we come to worship, we should remember that it is an embodied experience as well. The Eucharist keeps that front and center. But even like passing on the faith, it's not simply like getting someone to learn a set of propositions.
Yeah, and I think to that point and a few others that you just made, AI and our misunderstandings of it are sort of outgrowths of profound misunderstandings about what humans do when they understand anything. Mm-hmm. I mean, even when you look at like sci-fi, so like one of my favorite books recently is Clara and the Sun, which is precisely about a sort of android robot that sort of is better at worship. I mean, it doesn't get into, like, it's not saying necessarily like it grew a soul. It doesn't go that sort of like, but it's subtly asking what happens when like robots develop a religious sense, precisely when humans have lost theirs. But even then, right, there is this jump, right, that happens in the book where the mystery involved to make the robot understand that is precisely part of the fantasy making the point, right? So it's not like, oh, it did a calculation, it was like bleep blur, life is beautiful, and there's God, right? There's certain aspects about a lived experience that robots can't do that sort of makes the jump in that book, for instance. But what I'm getting at is, because we've made big mistakes about what we think happens, we have sort of replicated our mistakes, as it were, into AI systems and then decided that they're going to become alive because we understand being alive wrong, frankly. So, for instance, what someone might say over against the Vatican document is all embodiment is having sensory input. And so you think about someone like Descartes, right, who asks, like, what if there's an evil demon who gives, like, you're living, right, a nightmare, bud, and none of it's true. And so all you have is your brain in a vat and all these things like this. But that's sort of to misunderstand what embodiment means. It's not simply to say we have sensory inputs, because you could give sensory inputs to a robot, but even something like the common sense that like brings them together, that you live in a unified, integrated field of consciousness that we all know that we have, but like can't explain by the mere sort of input or output of our life running around in the 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions if you include time, but so you get my point, right? That we don't have an explanation for that, not because we're lacking data or sensory inputs, but because there's something more and more than merely epiphenomenal about being embodied in this life that a robot cannot have. Well, part of this goes to say, by calling it artificial and intelligence, and then together artificial intelligence, first of all, as this document shows really well, there's multiple things we call AI that don't really work the same. So what I think in the broadest sense is we're saying AI is anything that imitates human intelligence, like some aspect of it. But if that's what we mean, why isn't a book artificial intelligence? Because a book is an imitation of our memory, right? Or, our faculty for having an argument ready-made. So if you want to narrow it and go, okay, well, artificial intelligence is, so to speak, the imitations of intelligence that are sort of self-motivated, right? A book, as it were, can't sort of propel, it can't get better, right? The book is a book unless we do something directly to it. And so what they're usually getting at is that artificial intelligence is about neural networks that can, quote-unquote, learn. And I think that's where a lot of the questions start to mash up about, is that intelligence? Is it like ours? Do you get that sense that that's what they're saying, is that whatever artificial intelligence is, because there's a lot of different things they bring up, it's this idea of the ability to, quote unquote, learn information through techniques that have been programmed.
Yeah, I think that's it. Its imitative powers are pretty impressive. And that's where earlier I was kind of trying to relieve some listeners of certain anxieties that come with all this. I mean, I think there are some live anxieties, and the document talks about this. So we've kind of emphasized this throughout this whole series, that like the church is not Luddite in its approach. And it starts with that verse about bringing forth treasures old and new. It has the document at times has these kind of like reflections on, with a lot of technologies, there's not something evil about them in se, but the way that we use them or harness them, like that's where the moral questions enter into that space. And that's where, like, I do think there's something that feels sort of inert about a book. And even though it's a repository of knowledge that's often used by humans as sort of like an extension of their minds, AI has this like way of like spitting things back out. And it kind of, like I said, imitative, like it seems to learn. Now the document says it's not truly learning, again, in the way that we describe the human beings as learning, but because it has that kind of, because it has those powers, this is where I get into kind of the dangers. So, it talks about maybe the way that this could kind of like place an even greater burden on human relationships, because we do in our societies, and a lot of developed societies, have this sort of like epidemic of loneliness. And so unsurprisingly, some people are turning to AI to kind of like foster relationship. What's the, there was a Joaquin Phoenix movie called Her.
Yeah.
And he falls in love with basically like a computer.
Yes.
I mean, it probably gets even more dicey as it's combined with sort of like synthetic robots and things like this. But that's where human beings, like, it's almost like these tools become temptations that we can fall into. And there's kind of these like spiritual gaps in our life, and we're looking for them to fill them, but they're sort of like cisterns that can't provide the water that we need.
Well, and not to belabor this point, this might be something else entirely, but one of the talks that I gave once talks about this idea that a lot of times with the digital AI, the internet, a lot of stuff we hate about ourselves, we project onto the robots. So when people go, you realize, right, that, I mean, this is true. There was a test that the military ran where they had a drone, and they programmed the drone with how it could, quote unquote, kill targets. They didn't put live ammunition on it, but they put a program on about this is how you destroy targets best, and in this order and in this manner. And so, at any rate, it's running, or it's flying around, it's doing its preset thing, and then they go, okay, I forgot how they put it. They either said, don't strike the control tower, or they're like, okay, we're done, return to the control tower. And the AI, quote unquote, figured out, but it didn't. It just ran its protocol. And it's when running its protocol, it's like, I need to destroy the control tower because then I can finish all of my mission objectives. And of course, that sounds like robots taking over and trying to kill us. But when people start going, you know, they have a mind of their own. You're like, well, no, you programmed it that way. Like humans had this idea of you should win at any cost, and then you made a robot that could fly, and you gave it a program where it would win at every cost. The robot didn't come up with winning at any cost. That is a human thing that we've done for a long time, and someone messed up profoundly on the coding. And I think that document again and again points this out, that on one hand, we really need to bear down on what we mean when we say artificial intelligence, like machine learning. And like we got about 4 minutes in this segment, so we'll get to some of the dorkier terminology in the second one. But machine learning, large language models, you know, like all of this sort of ideas, this is stuff that the public should know about so they don't misattribute aspects of the technology where it doesn't belong. But really where the trouble mostly comes in is like at the base foundation and then how we decide to use it, which is often an accelerated version of errors and sinfulness we already do. And I think that that's what the document presses again and again is, on one hand, we need to demystify AI, at the same time realizing that because sinful humans are the people who created, designed, and run those things, our horrible desires can be magnified in a way that we are, because we have a mystification of the robots, that we're not taking serious enough.
Well, what do you think about, so I said, well, they're not going to take over the world, but do you think the use of AI could lead to some potentially pretty terrible disasters? So you think to the really tragic situation where that plane crashed into a helicopter, and that was really kind
opposite way around, but yes.
Yes, they've collided. So you're saying the
helicopter
yeah, sure.
I'm being a turkey.
Yeah, it's all right. So when that occurred, it was really due to like human negligence. They were understaffed, and so you were maybe asking people to do more than like a person should be like responsible for. But like there can be these kind of human mistakes through like oversights or groupthink. But as you talk about AI, and I guess I'm posing this to you because I think you have read more on this than I have. Like it sounds like we're sort of getting a computer to recognize patterns and things, and so it's even like you were saying with the AI that decided like now it is apropos to strike the tower. There was like a reason for that. It was almost like there was code in there that was saying like under certain circumstances you would like divert from the original like stated mission or whatever. And so like this almost relates back to what we've talked about the show about anti-fragile. Like you create these artificial intelligence systems, they're recognizing patterns and things, but like we've all been in situations where like there's this one factor that's not like you can't fully prepare for. And will a computer be able to like recognize that and use like, this is where I get into like wisdom or phronesis, where human beings have this kind of intuitive sense that maybe a computer will lack.
So funny enough, like we'll say this real quick before we go to break. It's sort of the big fights in baseball about Moneyball versus, you know, good old skippers. There's a way in which you can probably win 95% of games just playing numbers. But for 5% of them, you could never count how worthy a cost it is to have someone that, because of long experience, phronesis, or even just God-given natural talent, will see things different than Moneyball and get you a win, and often in the most important places. So what I want to argue is anytime you have an AI system fail, that's human failure. Now, may be the case that it will fail in a way that none of the humans that made it predicted it could. But I can tell you that meant that they set up the AI without the proper barriers or forethought or things like this that would cause those failures. Like, so, you know, to think about if you're going to make a machine that can machine learn that fast, something we'll talk about in the second half, you have a responsibility to not let it ever develop or go down that route. And the problem is, because it can learn so fast, we don't probably have the capacity to keep up with it, to look at it with that phronesis. This is the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. So, Bud, we're talking about the Vatican document on artificial intelligence. This is going in our series about technology, theology, and common good Catholic social teaching. One of the things we promised is to, through the lens of this document, start breaking down and demystifying some of what AI is. On one hand, if AI is too expansive, where it just means anything that is a product of humans that mimics our intelligence, you have to start asking, are books technically artificial intelligence? Conversely, if you make it too small, many things that we're rightly worried about that share some characteristics, we don't want to sort of parse this too much. Yeah. Essential to this, I would say, is a few things. One is machine learning. And machine, I think you should always say machine, quote unquote, learning, because it's how we got these things to look like they're learning, but I would argue very vehemently they're not doing what we're doing. So essentially what machine learning is, let's go with an easy one, which would be any of the AIs that can generate images. So you put something in, you're like, Bud Marr as Santa Claus at the 1986 Nebraska Bowl game, and it creates an image with you, and you have like 8 fingers or whatever, but relatively it looks like you. Okay, so
there's actually a picture of that already exists, photographic.
Okay. Nice. Sorry, that made me laugh too much. So what starts to happen in the image ones is basically what they figured out how to do without a human, but in imitation of a human, is they have this thing called latency mapping, and that means that it goes and searches the terms that you put in. It finds the images associated with those terms. It starts to overlap them, and then all machine learning is where it finds what it trains itself before it starts getting answers, prompts from you, is they take a picture of like what they want, right? The output, like they want a cat with wings, and they're like, this is what a cat with wings looks like. But they have it generate from these latency maps. So it goes, look, cats with and wing in its whatever database it has, and it starts jamming them together, and it keeps going like, that's not good, that's not good, that's not good, this one's better, that's not good, that's not good, this one's better, right? And they keep going until, humans actually were part of these first trials like this. You can actually still get a job if you go to LinkedIn where you do stuff like this, where you rate the AI machine code and decide whether it came up with a good latency map machine learned image or not. And so the reason that it can look like it's learning is because, of course, computers now can do like 1 million of these processes in such quick order that it begins to look like intelligence. But what it is it's just brute force speed of the thing deciding this image is better than that one, this one's better than that one, and it keeps improving. If you remember from the movie The Incredibles, where the bad guy was making a machine and he kept getting superheroes to come and defeat the machines, but when the machine could kill that superhero, he went and got another one. And the idea, right, that's like machine learning technically, right, is what image defeats the other one until in rapid succession you can finally get to the image that you want. And, of course, this is why the outlay for artificial intelligence generated machines like this is so massive. It takes tons of power. It takes tons of water. Every search in ChatGPT 4, for instance, uses way more water than a Google search does because of the sheer power and electricity that went into the machine learning. And so because it can do these searches and comparisons so fast, it mimics what learning is to us. So we talk about pattern recognition, and humans, we're not even like completely sure psychologically how humans do the pattern recognition overlapping, but it's clear that we're amazing at it because that's why metaphors work like they do, for instance, right? And that they're these living organisms that sort of like in live time can develop. But the machines can't do that, but they can mimic it by the sheer processing power. So you have machine learning, you have latency maps, right, where it goes and finds terms and overlays them with each other. And then you have large language models, like this is like ChatGPT-4, excuse me. And what it does is because it can, again, process so fast, it can find the average way that the prompt is answered by a human. And so what I mean by this is, for instance, if you put in logical paradoxes by name, so like if you put in the trolley problem, it will have searched its database so fast that it can replicate. It will tell you what the trolley problem is, and it can even probably tell you criticisms of the trolley problem, right? Because it can go look, and it seems like you're essentially Google searching, but the returns are in a mimic style of the average of human language. But they've proven again and again, if you put in different terms, but the same problem. So if you, instead of trolley problem, if you put horse carriage problem, it probably couldn't answer you. Oh. And if you, like, paradoxes are this way too. It knows the classic name for paradoxes, but if you change up the terms, like what's one of the ones that we've done in bioethics? It's like the lying knight problem or something like this, where it's like one of them's like, I'm telling the truth, and the other one says it's lying, and blah, 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 that one. If you change the names, it won't be able to answer you the paradox. But if you put in the names as it shows up, it can spit out what it's seen, which gets into one of the things that Pope Francis brings up again and again. This is the average response, and it's closed off. It seems like ChatGPT's infinite, but every ChatGPT has to stop at some point because the database has to be closed off at some point. And so actually we start replicating. So the more papers kids use ChatGPT to turn in to get an A on, the more ChatGPT will start sounding like ChatGPT. And AI has this problem in any of its fields, that as long as it's getting fresh inputs from humans, it can make predictions like you're talking about. But the more it hears itself, it will just start to it's like heat death of the universe. It's like entropy. Eventually it will just be all saying the same thing if we only keep putting back into it its own output.
Well, going back to the generated images, have you read up, do you know why? So AI images, there's kind of like little clues that you can see to detect them. So sometimes, like say you do like family going to church or whatever, yeah, it may generate kind of a cool image, but maybe like the mom's arm will be distorted, or a lot of people point out like the fingers are wrong. There'll be like 6 fingers.
Yeah. So again, like us, whatever patterns going on, we're like, oh yeah, humans, the thing, like, one of the things is they usually have 5 fingers, and if they don't, we notice it. But again, this is proof to you, AI doesn't think. So it goes and it sort of averages things out. But here's the deal, man, is you can, this is another paradox that sort of explains this. On average, every person probably has fewer friends than their friends have. That sounds weird, right? How is it that everyone on average can have fewer friends than their friends have? So here's why. Okay, let's say that you're someone and you have 4 friends. And each of those friends, like you're their only friend, and then there's 2 that have 5 friends, or, so it averages out. But all you need out of your 4 friends is 1 friend to have 12. And then the average for every human would be, on average, every human has friends that have more friends than they do, right? So this is this sort of weird idea, about how averages work and things like this. So in a similar way, because the robot's not, there's a norm, humans have 5 fingers unless something else is happening, it runs through all of this and it gets scattered information about the number of fingers. Because on the other hand too, right, is if you think about pictures it's drawing from, think about how many fingers when the Marrs take their family picture are in the picture, right? Can you do that math really fast?
I thought you were going to bring up the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but
why?
Because I think they have 3 like little.
Well, that might be. Well, the Simpsons have fewer fingers than we do.
Sometimes it's drawn from that, but you're saying like so in my family photo, maybe like in one picture, like a kid's doing like bunny ears behind.
No, I'm saying like there's 8 people in the Marr family. Yes,
10 total.
10
if you count the parents.
Yeah, 10. And how many fingers does each person have?
10.
So how many is that in total in that picture?
Yeah, 100.
Yeah. So the machine doesn't get like, this is a family of 10, so I need to divide these out. Some pictures have 100 fingers in it. Others have 10, some have 5, and then you get into bunny ears and all these things like this.
Yeah.
So it doesn't think. It just averages. And so fingers are extremely hard for it. And it doesn't understand like angles or what would be like a natural sort of way. So it just, depending on how the latency map is sort of mapped that time. And also, by the way, A lot of these artificial intelligences don't do things the same time every time. That's a whole other thing that we can get into. But you get into this, right, that this is the average of knowledge and not, this is the average of what went before, and that's not intelligence.
Yeah.
Intelligence is precisely saying there's a lot of stupid stuff out in the world, and people have been wrong a lot, even brilliantly people, right? Aristotle was wrong about the solar system through really no fault of his own because he didn't have the techniques right. But you start to see what I'm saying is the average human utterance is probably not completely correct if you just take everything that's ever been said. But it doesn't know. It doesn't care. It just wants to know what's average. What's the most likely thing to be said?
I'm thinking about the text thread that we probably text to the most. And if the AI was like kind of like creating averages from that, sort of like what it would spit out.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be intense. But mostly, I mean, a lot of wrong.
Alleged text.
A lot of wrong college football opinions on that thread.
That's right.
Mainly from the Hawkeye fans.
Oh.
No, there's only one. We won't name him on it. So we've talked some about artificial intelligence and writing, and what I like about what you pointed out, like some last week, some this week, is that really it's kind of done us a service because it's shown a light on sort of like the way that we've taught students not to write very well, and so it's kind of almost a mirror that's giving us a picture that we're not super happy to see. I think I was really intrigued. So there's some sections later in the document that I get into education and then healthcare. And since I work at a health sciences college, like there's some pretty like strong warnings against like robots will never replace nurses. That's my paraphrase. But one, like artificial intelligence, it says can't practice true empathy. But another, like medicine is the kind of art that can't be reduced to computations. And we're tempted to do that. Like sometimes as we practice medicine, it's like, oh, here's the list of prescriptions. And maybe if we have an artificial intelligence like if we have that sort of program, it will distribute the right amount of medicine each time. Or, you know, I mean, a really interesting part of the document is when it gets into triage. And could you use computers to say like who should be treated first?
Yes. In
an emergency situation or something. But there's all these sort of like intuitions, and some of them are rooted in culture. Like to begin to think about triage, at some point, the question of the good requires a moral evaluation, and you think about how could you code that? So again, even if you're saying like, you start thinking about some rules that you might want to follow, like always treat people below the age of 5 before those who are over 65.
Oh yeah. So I'm thinking of the movie I, Robot. Well, it's a book first, but like Will Smith famously did it. The whole premise about why he's a jaded cop is he was in, I think it's public transportation, doesn't matter that much. They go into the water and they're trapped in a car, and one of the robots goes in and saves him instead of the kid. And everyone admits the reason is because the robot, based on calculation, thought an adult was more likely to survive going to the surface than the kid. So it chose the human that it could likely save over the one it couldn't. Yeah. But he goes, everyone knows you saved the kid. You try, even if both die, you try to save the kid. Now here's the deal. In ethics class, right? That's a live problem. We've been, I mean, we have been arguing as that as a human race for a long time, but only humans can understand that it's a live question that deserves to be argued. Yeah. The robot's just going to follow what you've put in there. And dirty utilitarians programmed the robots of iRobot. Yeah. And that's how it decided to save. And he did survive, and you know, in some ways, right? Probably based on the calculation. I know this is fictional, but you get my point. Like, probably by the calculations, it's more likely that the human will survive. I mean, the human would survive. But I'm with Will Smith's character. I mean, and in the movie, right? He's like trying to fight the robot off to go save the kid, and the robot doesn't. And so he lives with all this guilt, and he hates robots and all these things like this.
Good.
Yeah, but this gets into it, right? Is just like. We've been teaching our kids to write algorithmically for decades at this point. We can go back and blame Harvard and some of their very first American English grammars and rhetoric composition books from the turn of last century, so like the 1910s, that taught things like the 5-paragraph monster. And so guess what? Not only is that what's going to be replicated in ChatGPT AI, they're also going to do it better because it has loads and loads of students' papers that have done exactly that algorithmic writing. But the problem is the algorithmic writing, except in the very few circumstances where it could be helpful. But what was it? It was easier to teach that way, bud. And so we started teaching everyone like that. And that sort of thing, an AI can, through machine learning, so to speak, short circuit in a very short amount of time.
Well, and this is where we're moving into a realm where it's not science fiction anymore. I'll get to this. So this is paragraph 73 from the document. However, if AI is, because it talks about ways that AI might be incorporated into healthcare. However, if AI is used not to enhance, but to replace the relationship between patients and healthcare providers, leaving patients to interact with a machine rather than a human being, it would reduce a crucially important human relational structure to a centralized, impersonal, and unequal framework. You and I attended a lecture a few years ago by our good friend Charlie Camosi, and he pointed out with the dearth of birth rates, like the drop in birth rates in developed nations, so an increasing proportion of the population being elderly. Also, for various reasons that we can't get into on today's episode, we're seeing an increase in the rates of dementia among the elderly. There's a real push in medicine today to farm out some of the care of those with dementia to basically robots. And so this is, I thought Camosi's conclusion was great. It's a prophetic moment for the church where we should really pray for consecrated religious. And he was throwing them out as like those who, set aside the goods of family life to sacrifice themselves in profound ways in service to the world for the glory of God, as sort of like they can provide a very important witness to the goodness of all life to the moment of natural death. Because, for-profit companies are corporations and things that they value and prize efficiency and are driven primarily by profit models. They're going to be very tempted to use impersonalized, centralized technology to take care of those with dementia.
And there's two things even just on that alone to bring up. But on one hand, let's not even sort of spiritualize it or mystify it. When we're talking about that humans need human interaction, beyond like theological reasons we might think that is so, just biological reasons, we have proof that the mirror neurons in your face, when they recognize another human face, react different than the face of a human that's on a screen, that's on a picture. A robot can never replicate it. And that gets down to things like, why we recognize human faces. It gets down to like pheromones that you smell, but you don't know you smell. It gets down into we're not going to be able to replicate that with robots. So the science, the biological science of it says it's not going to work the same with a robot. But conversely, when you start talking about what we think that we would be able to do, with robots and that we're going to make them more efficient and things like this, it will be more efficient in one way, right? So, we'll warehouse 500 memory care people and we'll have just a fleet of robots dealing with them. And so we only need to hire one or two people. But no one thinks about how much cobalt that would take to make and how many humans will have to dig in the earth in Africa to get the cobalt. They don't talk about the electricity that will use. They won't talk about the rear. So it's not even clear it's actually the most efficient in the long run. It just seems more efficient. And we don't seem to calculate that cost. And so that starts to be it, is if we're going to be all super duper science about this, let's talk about what neurobiology says. Humans need to look at other humans, or even, or hear, or like have some interaction with them, whether like all of their sensory apparatus work or not. Conversely, if we're going to talk about efficiency, people don't run the numbers in the full way, bud. Like the AI uses tons of resources, but we're just enamored because it's a very fast Google search bar without asking what all that means. And there's certainly more that we can talk about this. I think maybe next week we can pick up some of the deals. We don't necessarily have to have a part two, but to their credit, I really think that this document at least touches on multiple things that are salient for us to really talk about in the world.
Good job, Vatican, because people are prone to complain, but I think this is
Thumbs up, Vatican. They were even bringing up the name of the guy who first coined the term artificial intelligence, and I was pretty impressed by that. So, yes, make sure to go out and read this. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Bud, we sort of team huddled during the break, and this really is probably part one. We probably can talk about this because we didn't even get to the fact that like some of my favorite people on earth are quoted at the very end. We didn't really talk about AI and labor. There's a lot to bring up. I mean, one thing I think to say, Bud, is we really got robots wrong in the 80s and 90s. One thing that I think will surprise everyone is, you know how there's people, let's just be honest, they don't think the moon landing's real. We don't have to get into this. But they make this point, how on earth with as little computing power as we had back then, let's be honest, some point in the future, they're going to go, how did computers going to taking up like the whole room, like you were saying? And now, I mean, it's like, did a magic spell happen that they can all fit in your pocket? It is weird.
We should do a full episode on the moon landing, I think. That might be fun.
But one more time, more than a golf clap, big thumbs up to the Vatican for putting out a document. Woo! Very salient, very important, I think, especially for clergy and bishops, let alone the laity who are involved in these fields or anyone, to look at this document and be prayerful about considering a very pivotal moment in the human future.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you've sort of gestured to this at the beginning, but I also appreciated the economy of words. You know, so there's been some great encyclicals in recent years, but sometimes tough to slog through.
Heavy sledding.
Yeah, you kind of have to.
Tempting you to use ChatGPT to summarize.
Maybe the popes want us to form, you know, like little koinonia groups in our houses to discuss these things. But this one, you can really, if you've got a free evening, you can sit down by the fireplace and get through it.
I agree. Speaking of getting through stuff, Bud, and in the days to come, how can we share in a prayer life together that the robots can't replicate?
Yes, lots of opportunities to pray with Iowa Catholic Radio. 4 a.m. we do the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. That's followed right by the Rosary at 4:30. Later in the morning at 10 a.m., another Rosary. Daily Mass. We're doing Daily Mass from St. Francis of Assisi Church at 10:30 in the morning. And then later in the evening, let's see, I want to make sure I get this right, 8:30 p.m., the Father Groeschel Holy Rosary. I don't know, he's got a peaceful voice. Rest in peace.
Yes, he does. So all wonderful ways to make sure to join the prayer life. Something no robot can do. Something else the dirty robots can't do is actually appear embodied in person doing events together. So we got quite a few of those coming up in the Iowa Catholic Radio listening area. So if you go to iowacatholicradio.com/events, you can see what we're up to. February 25th through 28th, semi-annual spring fundraiser. Robots also can't give alms, but they might be able to move money around, but they don't give alms. You can, though, embodied soul. Yes, you human. You can prayerfully decide to give alms to Iowa Catholic Radio to make this ministry, which is not just us on the air, behind the boards, or behind the desks. It is your ministry as well, and you can keep it going. Please prayerfully discern giving during our semi-annual fundraiser. On March 1st, we have two big ones coming to town. Scott Hahn out at 8 a.m. at St. Francis of Assisi Parish Church, and then the Forge Conference, 8:30 a.m. on to the afternoon. You've heard multiple people talking about that. Prayerfully consider go see all that. There's all the first Friday masses that we have that are always the first Friday, of course, of the month at 11:30 a.m. at the chapel at Iowa Catholic Radio. And then the big one, April 2nd, an evening with Father Mike Schmidt, celebrating 20 years of Iowa Catholic Radio on air. You will not want to miss that. You can go click through on any of these, find out details, register, and all the good things like that. That's at iowacatholicradio.com/events. Bud, you know what? I'm glad you're not a robot. I mean, sometimes we've been like, without a light for charcoal grill, or, you know, it would be great if something could scale like 12 stories and get a better look at things, but I would choose you over a robot any day.
Well, since I'm not a robot, I'll do a little self-promotion. If you're listening to the show this week, and if this isn't podcast, but you're listening live, I will be speaking at St. Augustine's Parish on Monday, so February 24th, 7 p.m. on the history of Lent. I'd love to see you there. Come heckle me if you'd like, grab a book, throw vegetables, whatever you like to do at those sorts of events, but it should be fun. And next week, of course, is our spring fundraiser on Iowa Catholic Radio.
So keep that in your prayers. This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our family, our city, our state, nation, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast.